Hello and welcome to session 6 of Looking at Islam. And today we're going to be considering the Bible and the Quran and the common claim that Muslims make about both. Now, when you're talking with your Muslim friend, it is very common for Muslims to say to Christians that the Bible has been changed. This is a common teaching that they're given by their leaders, and it's something that as Christians we need to think about. Now, the first point I want to say to you is this, that when Muslims say the Bible has been changed, they're only telling you half of what they believe. They're telling you half of what they believe. The whole argument of what they believe is the Bible's been changed and is corrupt, and there is one perfect Quran to replace it. That's the full argument. It's not just the Bible's been corrupted, it's that the Bible's been corrupted and there's one perfect Quran. Now that's very important to remember, because if you want to have a successful, fruitful discussion with your Muslim friend, you can't just talk about one aspect of the argument. You need to look at both things of you need to look at both sides of what they believe. And so very often when you talk to a Muslim, they will just want to talk about the Bible and say, look at this in the Bible, look at that in the Bible. You need to resist doing that, and you need to say to them, we need to look at both books. We need to look at both books. If you just look at the Bible and try to defend the Bible, it's unlikely you'll make any progress, because they will be happy just to dismiss anything you say. You need to look at both the Bible and the Quran in terms of their preservation. Now, again, I have a leaflet about this on the Engaging with Islam website called The Preservation of the Quran, and there is a chapter about this in my book. But what do we need to know about the Quran? This is a subject that many Christians are not familiar with. Well, as it turns out, while Muslims may say there is only one Quran, that is a very superficial understanding of their faith, because there are in fact 10 different authorized Arabic Qurans, not translations, 10 different authorized Arabic Qurans in use around the world today. In fact, the number is actually higher than that, but 10 is the official number. Now, how is it that we got to that state? I'm going to explain this history to you briefly now, and then you'll be in a better position to not be deceived by your Muslim friends when they say there's one perfect Quran. Well, what do we know about the Quran? Well, the Hadith is clear that Muhammad never collected the Quran himself and made a copy of it, made a final edition of it, made what's called an autograph. There is no autograph of the Quran from Muhammad. Instead, what Muhammad did was he selected 4 of his trusted companions to be teachers of the Quran. And it was their job to write up the Quran and to teach it to others. And they did this. And so what we see is that when Muhammad dies, he had not made a collection, but his companions in the subsequent years made their own collections. And they began to teach different regions of the Islamic Empire. The Muslims, after Muhammad, began to conquer the people around them, and Muhammad's companions went with different armies into different regions. One companion went up into Iraq, another went to Syria, another went to Egypt, and these men taught the Quran as they had learned it from Muhammad and as they had collected it to these different regions of Muslims. And so what we see is that in the early years of Islam, there were synoptic Qurans. Synoptic Qurans. So just as we have Matthew, Mark and Luke, which are called the Synoptic Gospels, likewise there were synoptic Qurans. They were different in small ways in which Matthew, Mark and Luke are different. So they had different numbers of chapters within them. Some had 116 chapters, some had 110. The chapters were arranged differently. So that created a different context for how surahs were understood as they were recited next to each other. And then the verses within the chapters were actually different as well. And we've got some evidence for this, and I go through this in my book. We've got some evidence from a few manuscripts that we have, partial manuscripts, and plenty of evidence from quotes from Islamic scholars. So there were these synoptic Qurans which were different. Now, these differences between the Qurans actually led to problems within the Islamic world. For us as Christians, we accept Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but the Muslims didn't go down that path. They just wanted there to be one Quran, not these synoptic Qurans. And so they began to argue amongst themselves, and it began to cause trouble between the jihadist armies. The jihadist armies were now arguing with each other as to who had the right way of reciting the Quran. Let me read to you from the Hadith, which records this and what happened. Narrated Anas bin Malik, Hudhayfa, he was one of the leaders in the jihad, Hudhayfa was afraid of that is the Muslims of Syria and Iraq, and their differences in the recitation of the Quran. So he said to Uthman is the third caliph, the third leader in Islam after Muhammad. He said, "O chief of believers, save this nation before they differ about the book." So Uthman, so you can see what's happening here. These different Muslim armies are getting near each other as they join in jihad to fight against other people, and they're seeing that they recite the Quran differently, and it's leading to problems. And you don't want to have jihadist armies next to each other who are arguing with each other. And so Uthman has to do something. And so what does Uthman do? We read, so Uthman sent a message to Hafsa, that's Muhammad's wife or one of his wives, saying, "Send us the manuscripts of the Quran so that we may compile the Quranic materials in perfect copies and return the manuscripts to you." Hafsa sent it to Uthman. Uthman then ordered to rewrite the manuscripts in perfect copies. Uthman sent to every Muslim province one copy of what they had copied and ordered that all other Quranic materials, whether written in fragmentary manuscripts or whole copies, be burnt. So how did the Muslims get to have one or sort of one Quran? It was through the wholesale burning of all the other early collections that Muhammad's companions had made. The men that Muhammad had actually commissioned to make collections of the Quran and to teach the Quran, these men had done that, and now all these collections are being destroyed and one new collection is being made. Now these collections that were made by Muhammad's closest companions, men like Abdullah ibn Masud and Ubay ibn Ka'b. They were renowned as the greatest reciters of the Quran, yet none of them were consulted for this new edition of the Quran that is made. Therefore, I just want to say from a very basic point of view, from Islam's own sacred texts, it's a hollow claim when Muslims say to you, there's one Quran. There were many different Qurans in early Islam that Muhammad had actually commissioned to be made. He didn't make one himself. He allowed his companions to do it, and there were these different Qurans. The Muslims destroyed these early Qurans. We don't really have any complete manuscripts of these other Qurans at all. We've just got little fragments here or there. But it's a hollow claim, isn't it, to say the Bible's corrupted and there's one perfect Quran when Muslims themselves burned all the early Qurans from Muhammad's greatest companions and standardized another version. Now, the version that they made was written in very basic Arabic letters. And what I mean by that is, in Arabic, a simple dash like this, sort of like a running writing I, a little I like that. If you put 2 dots above it, that's a letter. If you put 1 dot above it, that's a different letter. If you put 3 dots above it, that's another letter. If you have 1 dot below it, that's another letter. If you have 2 dots below it, that's another letter. And there are many other shapes in the Arabic language which are like that, which have dots in different places. When the Muslims made this first standard version of the Quran, there were no dots. There were no dots, and there were no vowel markings. The vowels are these other little like lines that are put in place. And so what this meant was that without those dots and dashes, the text was quite vague. And you could vocalize or complete the word in different ways. And so an Arabic word, for instance, might be the prophets killed the enemies of God. Or if you put the dots and dashes in a different way, it might say the prophets were killed by the enemies of God. So you can change the complete meaning of the sentence just by changing a little dot here or there. And so these two Qurans that you can see on the screen now, they have over 1,300 of these small differences between them, where it's either active or passive, plural or singular, just changing the meaning of sentences. And these are Qurans that are in use today. They're in use today. And I've got an article on my website. You can see the URL here, which will show you these different versions and the nature of the differences between them in more detail. So it's a hollow claim when Muslims are saying that the Bible's corrupted and there's one perfect Quran. And you need to have this discussion with your Muslim friend. If they say the Bible is corrupt, you need to say, hang on, let's talk about both books. What are you saying about the Quran? And then show them some of this evidence. Again, there's a booklet to help you do that. But what about the Bible? What can we say about the preservation of the Bible? Well, I've got several points I want to bring up here, but I'm not going to go through all the details because these are details I think Christians know more about and certainly have been dealt with in many books that you can get from Christian sources. And so I'm not going to go through all those details, but I will give 5 points for the Bible. Now, the first of these is that we have many ancient copies of the Bible. We have many ancient copies of the Bible. For the Old Testament, we've got the Dead Sea Scrolls. And for the New Testament, we've got fragmentary manuscripts of the New Testament coming from the 2nd century right up until the present day. And it's from these that we can look at these ancient copies and see that it's been well preserved. It's been well preserved. Certainly there's been no rewriting of the story or anything like that. These ancient copies allow us to see the Bible as it was being spread across a wide range of areas. And what we know for the Bible is that it was never in one set of hands. Remember how the Quran went out into different places and then they destroyed those versions and just issued a new edition? No one's ever done that with the Bible. No one's ever done that. It's never been in one set of hands. It's just gone out and has been in the public domain from the very beginning. No one king, no one empire, no one's controlled it. It's been across empires, across regions. And we can look at these copies from these different regions and confirm what we have today. Secondly, we have ancient translations. Now, translations are not the original language that the Bible was written in, but they still give you a good idea about what that language was saying and what the story certainly was saying. And so ancient translations into, say for the New Testament, into Latin or Coptic, those types of languages show us what the New Testament was in the very early centuries of Christianity. And when it comes to the Old Testament, we can look at the Greek translation, commonly called the LXX, and we can look at that, which was done before Jesus, and we can see what that was saying about the Hebrew text at the time. And so translations are very important, and this is what scholars will use to confirm what the text is today. Thirdly, we can also look at quotes. Maybe you've written a letter to a friend and you've quoted a Bible verse to them. It's something that I'm sure we've all done, and we do it in our books and in our articles. We post Bible verses. Well, people have been posting and writing Bible verses from the very beginning. And so what we find is that with the early church fathers from the the end of the first century, that they're quoting the Bible, they're quoting the New Testament. And we can look at these quotes from those early centuries right up to the present. We can look and see what those quotes say. And those quotes confirm to us what the text of the Bible was. And so that's a third witness that we have to what the text of the Bible was. And so there are three main witnesses that we have: the ancient copies, the translations, and ancient quotes. Now, of course, the other thing we can do if we're looking at the Quran and making sure we've got the right manuscripts, the right words, we can also just look at the flow of the argument. The flow of the argument also helps you to know what the proper reading should be. And so when we look at the ancient copies, if there are any errors in copying, because remember, people are copying out a big book by hand, so there were inevitably some errors. Because we have so many copies from different locations, we can actually identify any errors that were made in those ancient manuscripts. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, say if someone in Rome is copying the Bible and they make a mistake. Well, the copies that they make and other copies that are made in that region will have that error, but that error won't affect people making copies of the Bible in Alexandria, in Egypt, or people up in Jerusalem making copies, or people around in Constantinople making copies. Right? So because we've got manuscripts from different regions, they are to some degree independent of each other. And any error in transmission that occurs in any of them can be identified by comparing them to each other. And that's what scholars do today. If you look in your footnotes, you'll sometimes see where they talk about variant readings. And what they've done is they've looked at copies of the Bible from different regions, and they can work out, the best reading. But we have so much evidence for the Bible. We have so much evidence for the Bible. As I said, we've got the ancient copies, translation, quotes. There is no other book from the ancient world which has this much evidence for it. The Bible has more evidence for its text than any other book from the ancient world. Other books are accepted. How much more can we accept the Bible? We have great evidence for it. Again, if you want more information on that, you can follow those books up. You can follow that up in other books. But just to conclude, the Bible and the Quran, it's a topic that often comes up when Christians and Muslims are talking. Muslims will say to Christians that the Bible is corrupted. We need to respond to them by saying, are you saying the Bible's corrupted and there's one perfect Quran? We've got to get them to admit that that's the argument, and then we've got to deal on a level playing field. And when we look at the Quran, we're going to see wholesale burning, different versions even today. And so the Muslim claim is false. Don't be deceived by it. And don't let your Muslim friend trick you and just think that it's nothing. Show them that evidence. Get on a level playing field, and then show them the evidence we have for the Bible with the ancient copies, ancient translations, quotes, and the amount of evidence that we can use to establish the text.